Dr. Karim Sharara, thank you very much for being my guest again. I wanted to cover this very important issue, which is the Iranian presidential elections. A week or two ago, unfortunately, I had a family situation and my uncle passed away, so I had to be with the family in Hamburg.
My
And I just returned
condolences.
in Berlin, so I want to cover this issue, although maybe it's an old news now, but it's very important because it has also implications, regional and international implications that we need to address after the election of Ebrahim Raisi. First of all, like the first question that always comes in my mind is the Iranian people elected Ebrahim Raisi as their new president, right? And we are already reading countless articles in the mainstream media calling him a hardliner or a radical, etc. How would you describe Raisi, and what are the main differences between him and Rohani, the
Okay.
ex-president of Iran, in terms of domestic and foreign policies?
First of all, there's the matter of the term used to describe him, a hardliner, a radical. When you look at Western media, basically you only have two terms that you can use for any president or any figure that is in Iran. He's either a hardliner / radical or a moderate. You don't have any other terms to use for any of them. Even if he's a radical reformist, so to speak, that's a moderate for them. Rohani is a moderate. So a moderate is someone who's basically anyone who's willing to show to show willingness to talk to the US. If anyone speaks for Iranian independence, if anyone speaks for Iranian sovereignty, if anyone speaks for the need for the US to get out of the region, if anyone speaks against Israel, that's a hardliner. And Rohani, if you follow the 8 years he's been president, he's he was at first called a moderate, then he's a hardliner, then he's a radical, then he's a moderate. So
it depends on the conditions, the regional
how
conditions.
The media wants to depict him. It's how the media wants to depict him, and where this media outlet's sympathies lie.
But do the people in Iran differentiate between a reformist and a radical as it is portrayed by the mainstream media, or it's only exclusively been like talked about or addressed by the media?
Look, there is a differentiation, but it's more widespread. Now, we're not here to sugarcoat things. Things in Iran, look, there's a lively political life in Iran. It's very lively. And because it's so lively because you have so many differences among the people. You have, on the one hand, you have the reformists, and they're a huge spectrum of people that include people who are 100% for the Islamic Republic, and they only want to push for basic, maybe, for example, legal reforms, legislative reforms, constitutional reforms, these sort of things. They also group people who would, on the other hand, I mean, another group of people who would be for for reforming the duties of the supreme leader. You also have people who would like the constitutional reforms and institutional reforms, as well as the duties of the supreme leader, like to modify them. And you have people who are against the Islamic Republic, like they may be religious, but against the Islamic Republic. You also have people who are leftist, but they may have leftist leanings. Maybe they may be anti-imperialist, but they're still, in a sense, for the Islamic Republic. But they still have leftist leanings. They may not be, for example, religious, so to speak. You also have the people who are against the Islamic Republic, but for the Shah, for the return of the Shah. You have people who are against everything and everyone and basically just want to topple the Islamic Republic and install a more Westernish regime.
Yeah, westernized regime.
So you have this huge spectrum of people of different political affiliations and ideas who are reformists. And on the other hand, you have the so-called hardliners, they're called the principalists. And they also have their differences among them, but they're more subtle differences. But the key idea behind this group is that they believe in the basic tenets of the Islamic Revolution. They're for reform, they're not against reform, but they're not for reform in the basic tenets of the Islamic Revolution.
Dr. Karim,
So
during the era of Obama, because you mentioned the hardliner and the reformist now, and it's very important to follow up on this. During the era of Obama, there were also an intention by the United States to open up on Iran, and there were talks. So the reformists came during this era, right? And they also wanted to talk to the Americans. But then when Trump came and he bulldogged against the Iran, do you think Trump gave gifted Ebrahim Raisi, or gave him like a service on golden plate because of his very radical policy against the Iranians, so that the Iranians' mood have changed?
Yes, there's no question about that. There is no question about that. Look, two main events helped the principalists. The principalists gain more ground in this election. Look, I'd say three events. I say three main things. First of all, Trump's maximum pressure policy that further cemented the idea that the Americans cannot be spoken to, that we have no way of going forward but to preserve our sovereignty and relying on our own selves. The West has done nothing for us, because when we actually did manage to come to an agreement with them, and we abided by this agreement, they did nothing to abide by it. They did nothing. As a matter of fact, the United States did everything it could to make sure the Europeans would not abide by it. And when Trump came, he just tore it up and left. So, there's this thing. Another idea is General Soleimani's assassination. This further cemented this Iranian identity and its anti-US leanings. And the third is domestic, and that's President Rohani's economic policies, because he, to a large extent, tied domestic economic policies with the fate of the JCPOA. So when the JCPOA came crashing down, so did the Iranian economy.
Yes, the other day I was also
putting it broadly, though. There's a lot of details to this, but I'm just putting the idea in very broad terms.
I was reading the other day an article also about Iran, and the article says that the biggest gift for Iran was Trump, for him to prove that the United States is not a reliable partner. And also the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, they were saying that the revenge of the Iranian people was by electing Ebrahim Raisi, for him to adopt harder policies, or let's say more principled policies regarding the United States. However,
had the US and the EU actually abided by the agreement, or at least, look, the Europeans, the Iranians asked the Europeans when the US exited the JCPOA to install another mechanism, the Instex mechanism, by which they may be able to manage their finances through Europe. This would be an alternative to the SWIFT mechanism, but the Europeans did not do that. They delayed this time and time again. Had they done this, the reformists might have had a major push for this election, because they were able to actually accomplish something that would have been groundbreaking, or even paradigm shifting.
Actually, there is a false conviction that we can read a lot on in media or on social media, that people think that there is an independent Europe or European bloc or independent European foreign policy. But at the end of the day, the leverage and the influence of the United States is enormous over the European continent, especially in terms of security and strategic partnership, NATO expansion towards the east, towards Russia. and bulldogging against Iran. And even like, if you see the policy of the European Union in the past 10 years, especially when they supported all these radical terrorists in the Middle East and North Africa, I mean, what did Europe gain except for blowbacks and flow of millions of refugees in their own countries? The United States didn't receive all these refugees. The burden was on the Europeans. So even on a social, economic, and security levels, it is a lose-lose game for the Europeans, as if they're shooting their own leg. And at the end of the day, still people think that they can really ask the Europeans to have a different foreign policy regarding the Middle East, where if we check the past at least 2 decades, especially when the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war and onwards, we can't really see like clear differences between the foreign policy of the European Union and the United States. It's usually that the United States draws the headlines of the foreign policy that the Europeans need to follow, and there could be some minor, let's say, differences, especially sometimes by France and Britain. The rest, especially Germany, is like completely following the United States in this regard.
Well, exactly. That's what I wanted to say. The Germany's ex-foreign minister had already said that the Germany's strategic outlook in terms of foreign policy is tied to the U.S. There's no escaping U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Germany.
Yes,
they've tied both their foreign policies together. So what are you going to expect from the Europeans? And Javad Zarif had said this time and time again that the Europeans aren't serious about implementing the JCPOA. They're not showing any independence from the US. There can be nothing, I mean, we can expect nothing from them in terms of being able to actually choose anything aside from what the US has outlined for them. Mm-hmm. It's, I mean, you just wonder what the European Union is there for. Yeah. Except to implement US policy. It's a playground for the US now, basically.
Exactly. Karim, as for the Iranian nuclear deal, how do you perceive the your first, let's say, impression of Raisi's policy regarding this very important issue, because it has regional and international implications, as we mentioned? Is he willing to continue negotiations with the Biden administration, or there would be more, let's say, some obstacles by the Iranian side now, or no new preconditions by the Iranian side to let's say, slow down the pace of the negotiations? Okay. Because on the other side, United States is already putting new preconditions, such as the Iranian ballistic missile program, or its regional influence in Iraq, Syria, okay, Lebanon, and Yemen.
Okay, to start from the end, the Iranians have stated this from the get-go. There will be no negotiating anything aside from the nuclear program itself. So that was off the table from the start. The United States has been trying to gain ground through the negotiations time and time again. The Iranians weren't willing to give them any ground. The only thing the Iranians were trying to get from the U.S. were their safeguards. Their safeguards for the implementation, for the actual implementation for the deal, because they didn't have any written guarantees the last time that the deal would be actually implemented. I mean, the US didn't even implement it. I mean, the deal wasn't passed in Congress. The only real guarantee that they had, of course, that was a gaffe on Zarif's part, because he tried, when he was asked, well, what's the guarantee that the deal would be implemented? He said, well, that's Kerry's signature. Kerry's signature is the guarantee. Mm-hmm. He's the man. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. But now the Iranians have learned from those mistakes. They need to get written guarantees, first of all. Second of all, they need to have, these guarantees need to have legal authority. Because if there's no pursuing these guarantees on a legal basis, then what are you going to do with them?
Exactly.
And third of all, it's not just about getting those guarantees and actually going back to the deal. The Iranians are not willing to go back to the deal unless, and these are the Iranian demands, the US goes back to the deal. The Iranians try the deal out for a period. I mean, we're guessing here, but judging by what experts are saying, it should be 3 to 6 months to assert that the US is in fact in the deal, that money is flowing into Iran on a regular basis, that there are no obstacles. And when that duration passes, well, then the Iranians will go back to the deal. And as for Raisi and what they're expecting of them, look, as soon as Raisi was elected, the Americans jumpstart. Well, the Americans actually doubled down on their efforts to secure a deal with Rohani, because they know that Rohani is more willing than Raisi to give them, well, not what they want, but to give them a bit more ground. Raisi won't concede so easily as Rohani, first of all. And second of all, if they do secure a deal before Raisi comes, then Raisi already said this during the debates. He said that the JCPOA needs a powerful government to implement it. So he's not against the JCPOA, because Iran is already signed the JCPOA and already took it on. So there's no ripping apart the deal like Trump did. But they're willing to implement it as long as the Americans are, one. Two, that you need a powerful government to implement this and to secure its implementation. That's what Raisi is saying. Now, there's been a lot of confusion in the media. They're saying that if Raisi comes, that there will be no JCPOA, there will be no negotiations. No, it's nothing like that. He's committed to the JCPOA, but he's asking, and he said this during his his last not the last one, the one before that, the press conference. He said that the US and Western powers need to go back to the JCPOA, and we're willing to do this. So he's not against this. He stated this outright.
Dr. Karim, the bigger elephant in the room is Israel, right? Especially in regards to the Iranian nuclear deal. How did Israel perceive the election of Raisi? I mean, we know Iran and Israel are arch enemies, but does Israel have a lesser of two evil candidate, which Tel Aviv liked to see in power in Iran?
From my understanding, from what I've seen, there's a division in the domestic policy of Israel on this regard. What's inside the government, what goes on in the government, and especially when Netanyahu is in power, and some security agencies. So what a lot of people were advising Netanyahu to do was to take it easy with regards to Iran and not to push things any forward. Not to try to push things forward, because the Americans don't want the Israelis to be reckless. And these people know that this is the right thing to do. They know that if Iran, they know that Iran abided by the JCPOA. There's no denying that. But they've also seen that when Trump exited the JCPOA, Iran doubled down on its nuclear efforts.
Yes.
So the only way to secure an actual implementation or an actual containment of Iran's nuclear ambitions, to use the Western term, is to get Iran to go back to the JCPOA. Now, with regards to how the Israelis view this, the one view is that Raisi isn't any different from Rohani, and they're both going to implement the same policies. The other view is that Raisi is more of a hardliner than Rohani, and of course he's going to do everything possible to make Iran a nuclear powerhouse. The nuclear deal and how Iran views its nuclear future and its internal capabilities is something of a strategy that doesn't really differ between moderates or reformists and principalists. So if you look, for example, just to take another example, the resistance in the region. No Iranian administration has shifted its approach to resistance in the region. This is this is something that's related to Iran's strategy, to Iran's strategic depth in the region, to Iran's goal to drive Western intervention out of the region. So and
But
Iran's
Karim, some would argue and say that the decision of supporting any armed resistance group in the region it belongs to the supreme leader of Iran and not to president or any other official in Iran.
No. Look, this is one of the principles of the Islamic Revolution itself. This isn't a decision made by the leader. This isn't a one man's decision. This is something that all official figures in the Islamic Republic, now because we're talking about Iran, believe in. There is no official figure that believes otherwise in the need to support resistance. And I'm not saying armed resistance per se, but armed resistance is one form of resistance. You need to support resistance in the region to drive Western intervention out of it and be able to secure your own independence and the independence of the peoples of the region. As for and I think I know what you're pointing at, and it's the fact that the supreme leader does everything in the Islamic Republic, and basically the others are just figureheads.
Yes,
or
that's just toys.
It's all a show. Exactly. It's not only a Western narrative, but it's also a narrative that's being pushed by the 200 plus channels that either speak Farsi or are funded by either Western or Arab or GCC countries. They're trying to spin this narrative that Iran is governed by a dictator. How cynical, considering that the very people who are supporting these media establishments are dictators. Yes, and he's a dictator, and basically this is all just a big show in order to give you the semblance of democracy. Well, look, I think this can be very easily dismantled if you look at the different foreign policies established by different presidents in Iran. You move from Hashemi Rafsanjani and the building phase in Iran, in the post-war building phase. And then you go from Rafsanjani to Khatami and his dialogue with civilizations. And the major breakthrough that he was able to, and the rapprochement that he had with Clinton at the time. Of course, he didn't go as far as he wanted to, or as he would have liked to, or as Western powers would have liked to. But still, there was a breakthrough at the time. And then from Khatami, you move to Ahmadinejad. Yes. And Ahmadinejad, you have the same person who was a thorn in the back of these same powers. And I'm not really speaking for Ahmadinejad, but that's how things were at the time. And then from Ahmadinejad, you have Rohani and the JCPOA.
Yes.
So each president has a major control over what policies the Islamic Republic can over what policies the Islamic Republic drafts and implements. How does this happen? This happens in the Supreme National Security Council. If we want to talk in details, we can, but just to speak in broad terms, the Supreme National Security Council is a 13-member institution. Basically, of these 13 members, you have 11 members, depending on what they're discussing, present in the actual discussion. For example, if it's an economic discussion, you have the finance minister. If it's a defense discussion, you have the defense minister. So you have 11 members, 6 of which are chosen by the president, 6 of which are chosen by the president of the Islamic Republic. So not only does the president have a huge control over what policies the Islamic Republic drafts in the council, but the policies aren't just foreign policies, they're also domestic policies, they're economic policies, they're defense policies, they're policies that can actually influence the resistance in the region. But the resistance in the region still hasn't changed. but economic policies and foreign policies have always changed between presidents.
Karim, I'm gonna ask you a linguistic question. Do you speak Farsi?
I'm not bad.
You know the way you're pronouncing the names. You know the way you're pronouncing the names of the presidents or the officials in Iran. It comes so Farsi accent that I I have the impression that
it's a habit you pick up from living there.
Farsi.
It's a habit you pick up from living there. Like imagine you saying, "Can you say Bashar Assad?" for example? It doesn't just roll off the tongue.
Exactly.
Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, I'm living now in Germany for like 5.5 years now. And even when I speak English, my pronunciation sometimes comes out like in a German accent, you know, and people like, what? Like the W is like V and you're like at the end, Rohani or Khatimi.
Look, it's just something you pick up from Iran, and it's hard to shake this off because you're pronouncing Farsi names. So this isn't something you can just quit on the spot. And this is something that a lot of people have pointed out, and I just can't seem to shake this off.
No, it's good. It's good. No criticism at all. In the contrary, it's fine. Karim, my last question, of course, because in Syrian analysis we focus a lot on Syria. I want to ask you about the approach of Raisi in regards to Syria. And some people may know that, of course, Syria and Iran they enjoy very good relations, but some people maybe know or don't know that there were some sort of a sensitivity between the Zarif Rohani team on one hand and Assad on the other hand. If we remember, this was 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago when Assad visited Tehran.
Yes.
And it wasn't coordinated with the foreign ministry of
because it was a last minute visit.
It was the last minute visit. And Zarif submitted his resignation. And in Syria, some people say that Rohani and Zarif didn't really put all their weight or power or will in the Syrian case, and they cooperated more with Turkey, for example, than with the Syrian side. What's your comment on that?
Okay. There's a lot I can comment on that, actually. There's the Zarif Rohani dynamic. There's the Raisi question, and that's aside. And there's the Zarif Rohani Qasim Soleimani dynamic.
So 3.
Okay. No, I'm putting Raisi aside for now because those are the two you want to discuss. And that's a tricky question. That's a good question. Look, with regards, we're not. First of all, let's address the elephant in the room, and it's the fact that Foreign Minister Zarif had previously. There was a linked audio tape of him saying things that reflected some sensitivity of his against martyr Qasim Soleimani. And this backfired on him, and it basically, for the most part, from what we can see now, ended his political career. Because Qasim Soleimani was a hero to the Iranian people, and you having some sort of animosity with him and speaking so frankly about it means that you no longer have any political prospects in the domestic political scene. Now, what happened here is the fact that Iranian efforts in the Syrian war picked up during the JCPOA negotiations. So on the one hand, you have the Quds Force trying to change the tide of war in Syria, because that, if you remember, that was the same time that the terrorists were closing in on Damascus.
Yes, they were 20 kilometers away from Damascus.
So there was a huge need to drive them out, and at the same time, you had the JCPOA negotiations, and they're making a lot of headway there. And Kerry points out to Zarif that you're using we're picking up a lot of movements from Iran to Syria on Iran Air, I think it was at the time. And basically he just let him know that where we know what you're up to, and you're not going to do anything behind our backs. Now Zarif didn't know anything about this, and this upset him, because in his understanding as a foreign minister, he should be the one to implement foreign policy, and he should be the one to decide what foreign policy is. But that's not the way things go in Iran or anywhere else in the world. What the foreign minister does is implement the government's foreign policy, and you're not the decision maker in terms of foreign policy. You're an executive.
Mm-hmm.
So Zarif's animosity stems from this dynamic on the one hand, not animosity, but sensitivity towards.
Yes, sensitivity. This is the right term.
And so when it came to Syria and the fact that President Assad showed up to Iran on a last-minute visit, and they didn't even know about it, that was the straw that broke the camel's back at the time. So it's not that they were pushing for Turkey more than anything, but they believed that the right economic policy in foreign policy to go with was one that would benefit Iran economically more, and Syria was in no position to benefit Iranian economy at the time, because Rohani's domestic economic policy relied more on welfare more than anything, on bringing up people's welfare and making sure they enjoy the fruits of life, so to speak, making sure they can see that they had become in a stronger position financially. Mm-hmm. And he was successful in the first 3 to 4 years, but was hugely unsuccessful in his second term. Mm-hmm. So that was why he was headed towards Turkey and the Western sphere more than Syria. But if we want to make a segue towards Raisi here, I think what Raisi would go for in the future would be a strengthening of the economic ties between like-minded countries in the region, so resistance countries, so the axis of resistance. And my understanding is that Iran, Syria, and Iraq, first and foremost, these three, maybe Lebanon later on, but I don't think Lebanon is capable of making any such move for them at the moment. These three will need to, or would most likely see economic partnerships among them, maybe to the point of establishing a common economic bloc between them. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the next step for Raisi, and I say this because he's speaking a lot of the idea of the resistance economy that Ayatollah Khamenei had spoken about for so many years now, and the need to implement it, because he basically laid out the tenets for this economy, but it hasn't been implemented, or at least not fully. What Raisi wants is to implement this economy. And to implement this economy, you need to have resistance countries or pro-resistance countries come together on more than one level, including the economic level.
Actually, this is really important, what you mentioned. I always call for economic integration in the region, and especially like between Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, and any other country would like to join regional integration, like in terms of economy, because when there is economic prosperity and the people have certain standards of living and welfare, etc., also the conflicts become less, and people start to become less radical, and there would be no foreign powers having windows to jump into exactly. Our countries and trying to recruit.
So all the economic efforts would be domestic.
Exactly.
You would need to achieve economic independence. So there would be, as you're saying, no Western powers trying to dictate their economic policies on you, or trying to grab you by the neck to say what you can or can't do just because they're holding the economic reins.
And by the way, Karim, if there is any sort of regional economic integration between these countries. This would be also beneficial for Europe. When you have a strong economic region in the Middle East that has a capacity and the capability of cooperating with Europe in terms of industry, in terms of technology, in terms of sharing the experiences. I don't understand what's the problem in that. Why are the Europeans are blindly following the Americans in this regard?
But the US won't allow this. Iran, yes. I mean, I wouldn't have believed it myself because unless I went to live there. And because I lived there, I got to see how Iran has been able to progress so much during the past 2 decades. During the past decade alone, you have a huge technological upheaval in Iran, and they're not able to export these technological achievements because the US has put a ban on them.
Yes.
If they were, you would have had. I mean, you would have had a huge upheaval in the countries of the region. You would have seen work on smart cities by now. You would have seen work on, I don't know, maybe a competitor for Tesla. I mean, there's already prototypes in Iran working on this.
Yes. Unfortunately, some
countries of the region would have made so much progress had the US not put a ban on their efforts to develop themselves. But yes, of course, the US isn't looking for any independent industrial work or independent developmental work. They need consumers. They need Saudi Arabia. They need people who are willing to pay in order to export their own.
To be a consumer economy based on services, and you're relying on foreign products or materials to push forward your own economy. And I want to mention Lebanon especially because I lived in Lebanon and you live in Lebanon, and I think the Lebanese are divided into two halves. We don't know which side is larger than the other, but one part is like, no, we are for cooperation with France and Italy and la. And I'm like, dude, cooperate with your region first, improve your economy, build your industrial, like the basis for your industry first, your agriculture, and become an independent economy before cooperating. What are you talking about? Greece,
look, we're seeing the ramifications of this right now. I mean, everyone who follows up in Lebanon knows what we're going through now, because the US has put a veto on us. Yes. The US won't allow any financial transactions belonging to suspect individuals, and the list can just extend or otherwise when the US wants it. We cannot. I mean, look, all of our money is now in Swiss banks just because our politicians have been sponsored by the US, and the US will not allow us to change the governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon. We have nothing because the US has not allowed us to produce anything.
Yes.
We have no industry. We have no agriculture. We're a consumer economy that's reliant on tourism. And so when any Western power decides that, well, it's time to put pressure on us, we cannot do anything about it.
Yes.
Because we're completely dependent on the West.
And I want to just finish this episode, Karim, or share this video with you. I want to mention something because it's a very sensitive issue also for me. Yesterday, somebody sent me a message on Facebook telling me that there is a woman in the city of Homs, and she needs urgently to have her chemotherapy. And because of the sanctions, the public hospitals were out of this chemotherapy. So she has to secure it from a private source. And it's very, very expensive, Karim. It's $500,000 Syrian lira, the one injection or something that I don't really understand. So yesterday we collected the money. There were people who, here in Europe were sending me money through PayPal. And imagine that I cannot even transfer this money to Syria because of the sanctions. Even in this humanitarian and very urgent emergency situation, I'm not able to transfer money to Syria because of the sanctions. And then they say it's a targeted sanctions. So what I have to do is to transfer to someone else in the Emirates, to my friend, and he has to give it cash to someone who is going to Syria, and that someone who arrives in Syria has to convert it into lira. So just imagine, this could take a week, and in a week, a person could die if he or she has a cancer, and it could spread. So all this talk about targeted sanctions against the regime or targeted sanctions against Lebanon or any other country like in Iran, it's an utter bullshit. And the people need to understand this, because it really hurts me when I see such stories in Syria. Imagine that we in Europe, we are very few. We were able to collect it 4 or 5 people, the amount. It's not a big amount for us in Europe, but even if we want to help, we are not able to do it. So we are really turning around the rules and trying to circumvent these sanctions in order to bring this amount into Syria for this person to be.
There's a key idea here with regards to these sanctions, and it's something common between Syria and Iran. The sanctions usually don't involve food or medicine.
Yes.
But what happens is that the U.S. Treasury is willing to go after any company, even if it's food or a medicinal company, that decides to do business in Syria or Iran. And these companies, for fear of U.S. prosecution, do not do anything and do not involve themselves in Syria or Iran. So even though the sanctions don't involve these two facets, companies are still afraid to do anything about it because the US will prosecute them.
Karim, not only that, even if the company agrees to deal with Syria, how can you do transaction? How can you pay for the company if like the Americans they think that we are stupid. Like they say they're targeted, we are not including food and medicine in the sanctions, but then they ban transaction. How can you pay for any company if you can't transfer money? You can't transfer any penny from Syria outside of Syria. How can you do that? Are you going to ship it with your bag, the money to Europe or in any other country? What kind of a job?
That's the hypocrisy of Western human rights.
Yes, of course. Oh, Karim, thank you very much for being my guest again.
Thank you for having me again.
Continue this sort of discussion with you in the future. You're very well informed of the region, and people need to hear also you. They need to hear a different perspective, right? Because it's one-sided, unfortunately, on the mainstream media. That's why people like you are very appreciated. Thank you very much, Karim. And guys, if you are enjoying such videos, please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support Syriana Analysis financially, you can become a patron. And through PayPal, guys, some people are sending me like a donation or help, and they write, "Thank you for everything you do for Syria" in the note. And just for that, your transaction is blocked. So even that, like PayPal doesn't accept any, like 10 euros. The other day, a friend sent me 10 euros and he says, "Thank you, everything you do for Syria, long live Syria," or something, and it's blocked. So just for you to know.
Do it in code, guys. Do it in code.
Targeted sanctions. Karim, thank you very much and see you next time.
See you next time.